Hello, and welcome to another exciting edition of the School Safety News Podcast live stream. I'm Amanda Klinger.
And I'm Dr. Amy Klinger.
And we are with the Educators School Safety Network.
Welcome.
If you are used to our podcasts in audio form, you can always come and find us here on YouTube Live, where we live stream some of the recordings. And if you're joining us still just in audio, rest assured that we're doing lots of fun things with our faces that you're missing out on. Sorry. So how this podcast works, we do have our other School Safety Free Period podcast, which is a little bit less formal and a little bit less academic and quite a bit more fun. And I tend to giggle a lot. But this is our School Safety News podcast, where we are a little bit more somber and a little bit more serious. And we try to catch you up on things that have come across our desk in the last couple of weeks about school safety. And then we try to have some takeaways.
And there's been a lot, so it's difficult to pick and choose. But we had really, I think, three things that we want to touch base on today. And we'll kind of do them in order from simplest to most complex.
Sure.
So I started keeping track at the end of January. I started looking at the number of bus accidents that we've had. And I know we've talked about them in the past, that, in October, we had just a horrific week with multiple fatalities, and it was just a very tragic sort of situation. So we've been kind of...
Before you get into that, I think it's important for us to talk about why we talk about bus accidents. I think, if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that we always talk about school shootings take up... It's a live stream, got dogs. We know that school shootings take up this oversized amount of space in our minds and in our media. And one of the reasons that we talk about bus accidents is they're really dangerous and really tragic and really horrific too. And so we want to make sure that we're drawing attention to other types of tragedies and other types of risks and hazards. So go ahead.
And that's not to say that every bus accident that occurs is catastrophic, or that every one that occurs is somebody's fault and could have been prevented, because in many ways, traffic accidents, things like that are sort of inevitable. But I think it is very interesting, to kind of keep an eye on that and really start looking at, are there things that we should be concerning ourselves with in school districts? So I was looking at the end of January, in one day, just in one particular day that I happened to be looking at, we had multiple accidents. We had one in Wisconsin where the bus driver was injured, one in Illinois where there were several students with minor injuries, Tennessee, West Virginia, Alabama, Indiana, and in South Carolina, a school bus caught on fire.
Wait,
that was in one day.
So how many accidents with injuries?
We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in one day, with at least 10 to 12 injuries. The next day, we had one in Louisiana with an injury and another one in Tennessee with an injury. And then the day after that, we had one in Illinois. A student in Texas was killed. That was the first fatality. 2 injuries when a bus was hit by a train. And then another one in North Carolina with no injuries. And that was just in this one particular week of just this 3-day period that I was kind of looking at. And so I think it's really important for us. The other thing that I think is one of the takeaways here is we hear about this with weather of, we need to close school because of the buses. Absolutely. But keep in mind, a lot of the bus accidents and problems that occur are not necessarily weather related. Right. They're, someone else impacting the bus. There's poor judgment, perhaps on the part of the driver. There's sometimes just circumstances.
There's the virtue of, driving a car can be a dangerous
circumstances
thing.
And things that happen with kids and so on. So I think that it's important for us to kind of keep an eye on that. And we're sort of doing some research on that. So we may talk about that more as the year progresses.
I think you brought up an interesting point about talking about, their accidents, the bus accidents. Some of it is just the nature of being on the road. There is a certain level of risk.
Yeah.
I think the corollary to that is when we're looking at schools, having that number of individuals, especially kids who are developing, their bodies and their brains are developing, having that many people, there will be accidents.
Yeah.
I think we need to make sure that we talk about, are we prepared to deal with someone who falls down the stairs or someone who bumps into each other? When we do vulnerability assessments, we're always looking at the trophy cases. Do the trophy cases have safety glass? Is it because we think someone's going to come and smash the trophy case? No. But if we have 500 students in that area at the beginning of school unsupervised, it's possible that someone could bump
Sure.
into each other and bump into the trophy case.
And before people get all militant, we are in no way impugning bus drivers, because that is a job I would never do.
I'm not cut out to be a bus driver.
So we are in no way impugning bus drivers. As a matter of fact, there's been a lot of research over the years that the safety record for school buses, your kid is more safe riding to school in a school bus than riding to school in your private car.
Right.
And so I think that's really a critical piece. But I think we oftentimes look at bus safety as being only involving the actual driver, as opposed to the supervision of students coming to the bus, the supervision of students getting off the bus being used in other extracurricular and other things outside the traditional school day. So there's a lot of folks, from the students to the parents to the other staff members, who can impact the safety of school buses, not just the drivers.
Yeah.
So we are not about trying to just dump this at the feet of school bus drivers and say, hey, keep kids safe. This is very much a community-based sort of effort. So shifting gears a bit, I wanted to talk about an incident that occurred several weeks ago, and many of you have probably seen the video because it was very widely covered. This was in Eugene, Oregon, where a non-custodial parent came to the school, had enrolled the student, his daughter. There was some sort of custody sort of issue, and the body cam from the officer begins as they are removing him from the school. He pulls a gun and things go very much sideways. And I don't want to deconstruct the officer's response, because it's pretty clear that, what happened. So there's not a lot of gray area there.
We're not law enforcement officials. And so the reason we're talking about it is not to litigate their response.
Right. But and it's not just about, oh, how shocking that this thing occurred in the school. What I really wanted to have a conversation about is this situation began in the lobby of the school and moved to just outside the door. So it was not off campus. It was not out in the parking lot far removed. It was really right where kids were. And so there's a couple of things about that. If you have the opportunity, and you've looked at the video, you maybe know what we're talking about. But we have a very violent situation that occurs very quickly. There is no time for lots of warnings to go out. There is no time to lock down the school. You've got two officers involved, and they are both intimately involved in this struggle.
And we didn't say yet that there were lots of shots fired. This wasn't like a fight.
Right.
I think it's probably important to...
Multiple shots fired, but there is no time for the carefully crafted communications plan to get implemented.
You are responding.
There is no time for the officer to do all the things that we unfortunately have invested in SROs, that you're going to do this and this and this and this. Well, he is literally engaged in a struggle for his life. And so one of the things that I think is very impactful about this for us to think about is, what do we as educators and students and other people in the school, what should we have been doing during that time? So you have this thing that's happening very quickly, but you have students in proximity, possibly. You have a need for communication to the organization at large. There is we can go back and look at, okay, this is what happened, but there's so much chaos that it's very difficult to ascertain exactly what's happening. And so there was a lot that needed to occur that was not squarely on the shoulders of law enforcement. There was a lot that the school administrators and the school staff needed to do. And the thing that really struck me
Did it happen during the school day?
I believe so. Okay. Yeah. But what I think is, because his daughter was there in the hallway. And so the kids were, the students were there.
And you're going to assume to get to the point of talking about recovery.
Well, before we do that, though, what I want to talk about is this whole idea of communication, of how quickly did people need to respond. There wasn't time to push out a lot of announcements. And we see oftentimes situations where everyone sort of thinks, well, I think I hear gunshots, but that can't be that. And wow, I wonder what's happening over there. And they're waiting for permission to respond, as opposed to responding. And I think that for me is the big takeaway, is there isn't going to be a formalized announcement in this case. When I'm a teacher with my class walking by this situation, or I'm looking out the window of my classroom, seeing shots being fired, there will not necessarily be a big discussion of what
Mhm.
you should do. And so it really speaks to that notion of empowering teachers to
Mhm.
be able to respond and not wait for permission to do so. And
Mhm.
also for people to overcome that sort of normalcy bias of wonder what's happening and sort of standing there watching it unfold as opposed to flipping a switch and getting into action.
Mhm.
And not just, we would hope that the adults in the building have been trained to do so. But also, this is a middle school where kids are moving
Right.
around independently, and having conversations with kids about how do you get away from this, or how do you somehow, secure yourself away from a situation like that. Because again, developmentally, many kids are going to go want to see what's going on. Let me move towards that so I can see what's happening. And so those are really important conversations that our drills don't cover when we just do, okay, we're going to do a drill and everyone knows that this was something that occurred right in the middle of the life of the school.
Yeah. And I think it also, as we talked about earlier with the bus accidents, underscores the notion that we need to be preparing for other types of hazards. If we think of, violence at school can only be an active shooter. This wasn't an active shooter event, but there were shots fired. There was real danger. There was a fatality. So we need to make sure that we are really expanding our understanding and our scope of what are the different types of things that we're preparing
And I can
for.
tell you as an administrator, I think we don't necessarily always see the potential threats the way that a law enforcement person does. So as an administrator, I may be talking with a parent who's really upset and agitated, and I'm asking them to leave and they don't want to go. But there needs to be a place somewhere in the back of my mind that I can respond to. He's pulling something, he has something. And that is not something that we typically do. And so it's fortunate. This is a great example of where it was fortunate that there was a law enforcement involvement in this violent incident. But that may not always be the case. So we have to be prepared as administrators and educators to flip the switch or to make that transition from this is this low level sort of event to this escalated really rapidly. And we see people that work in leveled lockdowns or schools that have leveled lockdowns where they say, oh, this is a non-custodial parent in the school. So this is a low level threat. We never have to worry about anything happening from there. Thank goodness it's not something bad. It could go very quickly.
Right.
And I think that how quickly that escalated is the other takeaway.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you do the last one because it's a doozy.
So our third one is, unfortunately, we're still sort of waiting for all of the facts to kind of shake out.
And it's been 3-4 weeks.
Yeah, it's been a while. But this was the case in Binghamton, New York, where there were a number of middle school girls,
four 12-year-olds,
who alleged that they were strip searched for drugs after appearing hyper and giddy. And the school,
if 12-year-old girls,
or being a middle schooler, yeah. But the school contends that it was not a strip search, that it was a wellness check in the nurse's office, and that they were not being strip searched. So,
and that they had to take off their outer
garments for
clothes, their coats, or etc. for blood pressure checks and wellness screening.
And I couldn't tell from what I was reading that there was 4 girls. It seems like 3 of them in their account consented to the search, whether it was a strip search or a search or not, but they consented to whatever happened. And a 4th did not, and contends that one had received an in-school suspension, which
refusing to.
But I couldn't tell if the school was disagreeing with that,
right,
whether there was an in-school suspension or not. So that's kind of tough.
So you have this continuum, depending on, the allegations flying. You have this continuum of, we had students, we were concerned about their health. And so we conducted a wellness check of, sobriety sort of check of blood pressure, et cetera, all the way down this really ugly continuum to asking 12-year-olds to take off their clothes and submit to a strip search that involves searching in their undergarments. And so that's
stripping down. So I think, to be really precise, I think what they're alleging is that they were asked or forced or coerced to strip down to their undergarments,
but also
that their undergarments were searched. Yeah.
Right. And so that's this huge continuum of, and it raises a lot of questions that I struggle with, because number one, we're not privy to all the information and frankly have not followed this case maybe as closely as other people have, but it really raises a couple of questions and sort of dichotomous questions of who we need to be concerned about and advocating and protecting the rights of these 4 12-year-old girls. But we also can't assume that the school did something so heinous, but on the other,
especially when the school is explicitly denying
Denying
that's
that.
what happened.
and so I guess the question is, how did we get so far apart
In the two different sides,
in these
two
two
versions of the story?
How did we get so far apart in this? What do they agree on? There doesn't appear to be a lot that they agree on, other than that the 12-year-old girls were acting like 12-year-old girls, were laughing and giddy and messing around, and then everything sort of went south from there. And I just think that's what's very striking about this one, is how far apart they are, but also how the community has really been very heavily involved. Lots of advocacy, lots of people at board meetings, all the way up to the governor's office. And now there is a state level investigation. The district has hired an independent investigator, even though they say nothing occurred. There's been police reports filed from some of the girls. So, I mean, this, regardless of what it all ends up when it all shakes out, there's a big continuum of what really happened there.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple things that we need to talk about. So one, we can talk about the legal standard for strip searching a student. But before we get to that point, I think because there's such a large discrepancy between what the kids say happened and what the school says happened, even if you take a line of inquiry that is most favorable to the school district, something happened that those 4 kids all feel like that would make that, and I think I read that they were taken individually into the nurse's office. So it wasn't that all 4 of them did it. So there is something that happened.
What were we really trying to get to?
Right, because,
I mean, that was my question overall.
If I'm a student and I'm acting some kind of way and you perform a wellness check on me and it goes well, and I go, oh yeah, well, okay, I'm well, and I go back to class. And they care about me. They care about me, and I go back to class. There really isn't a high likelihood that I'm going to then fabricate a story of this horrific, traumatic thing that happened to me. Right. If that was a good interaction where I felt like, oh wow, you were concerned about me, and I got my blood pressure taken, and I went back to class, and I feel like people at the school care about me, then there's not really the reason, you know what I mean? So even if there wasn't a strip search that was conducted, I do feel like something went sideways. Something didn't go the way that we would hope for it to go, that we ended up at this point.
Well, and clearly there must be issues with the climate and the culture and the trust of that community. Well, let's start with the school first. The trust within the community within the school community for those kids and those adults who were involved in this investigation. And everyone seems to agree on this whole thing being started because of being giddy. And I mean, so there was no evidence of, at least doesn't appear to be, there was no evidence that someone had drugs, or that there was no tip or
intoxication.
And there was no one that said, okay, these girls have drugs or anything. I mean, so I'm concerned about how you go from the very low level of these girls are just, mess around, giddy, laughing, to drugs without lots of, any other indicators in between. And maybe, in the course of the investigation, all that will come out. But I just find it interesting that these two sides are so far apart. There's a problem. I just don't know what it is.
Well, so I think let's circle back to the legal standard for this. And we talk about, what is a strip search of a student? It's having them remove any article of clothing. So if you ask me to take off this jacket so that you can search what's underneath it, that's technically a strip search. If you ask me to hold my jacket away from my body so that you can search, that's technically a strip search. So it's a pretty easy to get into strip search territory. And so what the
And
students
we've seen cases where people have just been out of control in terms of, and my concern, not necessarily saying in this particular case, but the concern I think that people have with strip search is you have to weigh, what am I really going after here? And is it such a potential risk and so dangerous that it's worth this invasion and all the problems associated with it? You know, we're doing all this because we think somebody stole $20 of prom money.
So let's do this. So I teach school law online for students who are getting pre-service teachers who are getting their administrative licensure. And so
they're pre-service administrators.
Yeah. So I teach this stuff. So let's ask you. So under normal circumstances for a normal search, what is the standard? What are we looking for? What is the standard of when I can search a student? Not a strip search, when I can search a student.
You're asking me to say legally, or you're asking me to say pragmatically? Because I'll say pragmatically.
The legal standard. What is the
pragmatically?
Legal standard?
It's going to have to be a real problem for me to endeavor to. And
a
again,
normal search, not a strip search. For me to go, hey, let me see your bag. Let me see what you have in your book bag.
Well, the locker, I can search the locker anytime.
Why is that?
Because it's public property.
It is school property, and hopefully you have something in your handbook to that effect, that it is school property and it can be searched at any time. Okay.
But what about a student can voluntarily submit to a search, but we also have to take into account the authority aspect of, am I intimidating them into that?
Yes.
Yeah. So are they really consenting, or are they just doing it?
Okay. So so you're dancing around the question. So what's the legal standard of when can I go?
I'm not the attorney.
Let me see what's in there.
Take the fifth.
Okay. Well, so the legal standard for a cop on the street with an adult is
probable
cause, right? It's actually a lower standard for you don't really. It's reasonable suspicion. So I have reasonable suspicion that there is something dangerous, that there is drugs, that a school, there's been a crime, or you've broken a school rule. So reasonable suspicion. So it's a lower standard.
And the coverage of this particular event may not have clued us into what that reasonable standard. The only thing that has been offered up as this reasonable standard is giddy and hyper.
Right. And even if you say they are giddy and hyper, that's not reasonable suspicion for a strip search. So for a strip search, it's a higher bar. Yet where we're talking about that the degree of intrusion has to match and be commensurate with the concern. So if we're strip searching for a weapon, if I have a real concern that there is a weapon, a strip search is much more reasonable. The famous case is that they were strip searching students for money that had been stolen. You know that one. Yeah. You didn't know the reasons. So strip searching for a weapon, you can see how that's very different versus strip searching for $200 that was stolen from the cash drawer. So I would be concerned if it were to come out that they were actually strip searched. There's going to be a lawsuit either way, but that's pretty far afield from the legal definition.
Forgetting the legal side. You know, you alluded earlier in this podcast to the whole idea of recovery. How does a school move forward from the fatal shooting of a non-custodial parent literally on the steps of the school
with their child there?
Right. Yeah. How does the school move forward from, because you have to have school, and this particular school in New York is not going to shut down until this case is resolved. Right. So how do you move forward? How do you be respectful of the concerns of 200 plus parents? How do you advocate for the 4 students? Because they do need an advocate, and they do need someone to protect their rights and to ensure that they were treated appropriately. And how do you continue to build that or work on the community relations of, I'm trying to have school. I have administrators that need to do a job. I have teachers that need to teach. I have parents that need to cooperate. How do we avoid, or how do we keep from this thing overwhelming or taking over everything that we're doing in the school? Because it makes everything else suspect.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. And so I hope that people are being forthcoming. I hope that they're able to, I think it's probably a good idea to have an independent sort of investigation. But if something has been done inappropriately on anybody's side, it's not, what is it? It's not the crime, it's the cover up. And hopefully they come to some resolution.
Yeah. So there you have it. Everything else?
Nope. Next week, I'm going to quiz you on vague administrative tactics and see how you do.
You didn't have to take a school law course to get your administrative licensure?
We'll just talk about the work of Marzano next week and see if you can come up with anything.
So maybe we'll just bicker. Maybe next podcast will just be us bickering about maybe something unrelated to school safety. Who could say? There you have it. Please do like, subscribe, and rate and review the podcast. You can find this podcast, if you're listening to it, you can find it anywhere that you get podcasts. So iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, all of those. You can also listen to stuff directly on our website. If you're here on YouTube watching us, you can check out some of the other videos and resources that we have. Our website is www.eschoolsafety.org, and you can check out all the information that we have there, and you can always reach us by email, info@eschoolsafety.org. So until next time.
Bye.
Thanks.